Thank you so much. Tonight, friends, we are honored to present to you our speaker of the evening of this event. This is Dr. Melanie Niin, Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. She is a Professor of Education at the University of Southampton. She is also Director of the Center of Research and Inclusion in the Southampton Educational School. Melanie is one of the co-editors of the Economics and Social Research Council National Center of Research Methods, where she leads research on the pedagogy of research methods learning. Of the International Journal of Research and Method in Education and on the International Advisory of Educational Boards for the British Journal of Learning Disabilities, European Journal of Special Needs Education and Disability and Society. Her recent research projects have focused on pedagogy and innovation in research methods and on quality in inclusive research. Melanie edits the Bloomsbury Research Methods for Education book series. Melanie began her teaching career in special schools as a teacher of students with severe and complex learning difficulties. It is here that she developed and evaluated the teaching approach of intensive interaction, for which she is best known. She has also taught in further education colleges where she has coordinated support for students with learning difficulties and disabilities. In higher education, she has worked as an associate research fellow in the Center for Autism Studies at the University of Hertfordshire, and as a senior lecturer in special education at Oxford Brookes University and at the Open University, developing and teaching undergraduate and postgraduate distance learning courses in inclusive education. Melanie's particular areas of interest and expertise lie in qualitative inclusive research methodology and in the fields of interactive and inclusive pedagogy, in particular pertaining to learning disability and autism within the broad social justice framework. Ladies and gentlemen, let us warmly welcome Dr. Melanie Niin to our colloquium tonight. Let us give her our undivided attention. Dr. Melanie.
Thank you very much.
Fine.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Okay, so I'm just now going to work out how to share my screen again.
Sure.
Let's do that. It's always this technical bit first of all, isn't there?
Yes.
Are we there? Can you see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent, thank you. And so let me begin. And I first of all want to say how lovely it is to be here. From the comfort of my own study, of course, but I feel as if I'm among you in the Asia Research Association, Qualitative Research Association. And it's especially great to be here representing the National Centre for Research Methods on this day, because this is the day when we are launching our 4th term as a centre. We have been funded for 5 years at a time from our Research Council, the Economic and Social Research Council, and we're just launching our 4th term, which will take us up to 20 years of doing this. And what we do in the National Centre for Research Methods is try to enhance the quality of research and researchers in the social sciences and related disciplines in the UK and more widely. So you can see that it's great for me to be here talking about this subject today, which is about doing our qualitative research well. And I'm going to be exploring with you today concepts of quality, what it means to do our research well. And I'll do that primarily through sharing some of the projects with you that I've done through the NCRM. Okay. So first of all, I've just put this slide up really to highlight the challenge, and I've taken this challenge of knowing when qualitative research is done well from a peer review request that I had, and these were the questions posed to me as the reviewer. Does the qualitative research study follow the conventional standards for qualitative research? And has the work been carried out to an acceptable standard in terms of transparency, authenticity, and credibility? And then some of the other standard questions, of course. But whenever we are asked to review a piece of qualitative research, it leads us to really think about, well, what are the conventional standards? What is the high point for qualitative research? How do we know rigor and transparency, etc., when we see them? So this is the kinds of areas we're going to be thinking about for the next half an hour. So just a little reminder of why this all matters. I'm sure in your association you're very familiar with the paradigm wars of the 1980s and 1990s, when qualitative research was finding a place. And although now there is widespread support for qualitative research, this support is still partial in some quarters. There's still hierarchies. The randomized controlled trial is still held highly in esteem, and we still have to fight the corner for qualitative research. And I think among the qualitative research community, we're still sometimes pondering around whether what we do is a science or an art. And I think certainly within the National Centre for Research Methods, we're aware of the kind of economic and political and academic pushes and pulls of quantitative and qualitative research. But I would argue to you today that the world's problems most certainly need good quality qualitative research, which is why we need to attend to these matters. Now, it's easy, of course, to find some guiding principles. You can just Google them. Google what it means to do qualitative research well, and you'll find some guiding principles. So I don't want to spend too much time on these, but I do want to just flag them and remind us of what's out there in the common literature. And these guiding principles for doing qualitative research well come from Mays and Pope, and Kathy Pope is a colleague of mine who I rate very highly. So we have this relationship with theory. Our qualitative research often produces theory, or certainly our claims need to be consistent with our theoretical stance. We have the principle of credibility, that the participants in our research should recognise our account of it, and readers should find that credible. We have rich description of cultural and contextual features. I remember Kathy Silver, who is a qualitative researcher I hold in high esteem, saying context is everything. Context is everything in qualitative research. Research reflexivity, of course. That need for us to reflect critically on the role we ourselves as researchers are playing in our research. It doesn't happen separate to us. We are part of that research. We are part of that knowledge generation. Rigor, and I know you've got to focus on rigor. And rigor here is defined tightly as, you know, looking for and discussing counter evidence or exceptions to patterns in our qualitative data. But I think you can use rigor more loosely as well to say that all of these principles are around doing qualitative research with care and thoroughness and rigor. We have transparency, this ability to see how you got there, how you got from that methodology to those findings and those recommendations. All of this process we know needs to be transparent and clear. And there needs to be some kind of possibility of transferring what we find as qualitative researchers to other settings. So I hope none of those things are unfamiliar to you, but they're just a little reminder. And I've come across this in the literature, and we might want to discuss this. I'll be interested to see if any questions come up about it. The TACT framework. This is where Ben Daniel, I think working in New Zealand, has worked on the kinds of literature that I've just posed to you and come up with these 4 kind of dimensions: trustworthiness, auditability, creditability, and transferability, which are very hard to say. And this framework then, he's turned into a toolkit for methodology courses, so that you can see, make sure that you're teaching how to do qualitative research well. And I come back to that at the end. But what I find very interesting about this TACT framework is that when he was working on it, he used very positivist quantitative methods, if you like, to test its acceptability to people, which is a certain irony in there, I think. Okay, I hope you're still with me. So the next stage I'm taking you through in this presentation today is an exploration by NCM researchers, National Centre for Research Methods researchers, and what we've been working on in terms of this agenda of ensuring that qualitative research is done well, that we have quality and rigour, and all those other quality indicators in our research. And I turn first to one of our most popular questions. And this is a piece of work that my colleague Ros Edwards led on, Professor Ros Edwards. And if any of you came to the World Conference of Qualitative Research last year, you may have met Ros there. But what they were looking at was this idea of sufficiency in qualitative research, and the frequent question that we get asked time and time again by our masters and doctoral researchers, students of qualitative methods: how many interviews is enough? How many of these do we have to do to make sure we've done enough, that this research is going to be acceptable to people? And Ros, with her colleague Baker, went about trying to answer this question and provide some resource and guidance for these early career researchers by inviting 14 renowned social scientists and 5 early career researchers to discuss this phenomenon. And, on my slides here, I'm cutting to the answer for you in a playful way, in that for them, the answer to their question was 19. They went to 19 people to answer the question of how many researchers do you need, how many interviews do you need? But the real answer, of course, and this won't surprise qualitative researchers out there, was that these experts came back and said, it depends. The qualitative researcher's friend, it depends. And they found that people were talking about it depends on the resource and the time that you have. A £2 million grant might have a different expectation of how many qualitative interviews is enough compared with a small-scale doctoral study. The research question might dictate how many interviews is enough. Whether or not you keep getting different answers might dictate whether you need to keep going and asking new people. And this is this idea, of course, of data saturation. And our desire as qualitative researchers to have an understanding of how and why people perceive and reflect and interact as they do. So this needs to guide us in our idea about, have we got sufficient data? Have we got enough? And our experts, of course, being at the cutting edge of social science research, also kind of came back and said, well, a single interview may be enough to produce a rich account of subjective social experience. And one even said, well, you may need no interviews. The interview may not be the right method altogether. And so, you know, this is about us as qualitative researchers thinking very critically. For a quantitative person, they might more readily come up with a number about how many of something is enough. But for qualitative researchers, this is something that we might debate and involves critical reflection. And on the slides, which I hope you'll all have available afterwards, is just a link to the resource where you can read those responses and discussions of that question around sufficiency. Okay, I'm moving on to a different project now, and I'm cheating in a way because I'm calling this NCRM research, but actually it's my research and I'm an NCRM researcher. So I'm letting National Centre for Research Methods borrow this research for the purposes of today because it's so spot on to our topic. So I had a separate grant from the Research Council to explore the question of what makes research both inclusive and good quality. Now, Pavel, when he was introducing me, was saying that, you know, my areas are around inclusive pedagogy, inclusive research methods, intellectual disabilities. And in this area, what we've seen is a really interesting growth of participatory methods, emancipatory research, which I use the umbrella term inclusive research to describe. And in this inclusive research, what we're trying to do is do research with people rather than on them, to go on this research journey together. But the question that we were asking in this piece of research is around, does the desire for quality research pull you one way and the desire for quality inclusion pull you in the other way, so that there's a tension between them? And is there a way that we can make sure that we do both well? We do qualitative research well and we do inclusion well. And the quick answer to this one is there's no one right way of doing inclusive research to make sure that it's good quality and good inclusion. But just to give you a little flavour of this research today, the way I conducted this, or my team conducted this, was to have an ongoing series of iterative focus groups with people exploring and coming to know their own processes better, to try to understand what the people who do inclusive research understand about what it means to do it inclusively and to do it well. And this highlighted issues about teamwork mattering, the actual process, the trust, the openness in which we work. It highlighted this idea of points of connection. It doesn't matter if people with intellectual disabilities want something different from the research. And as an academic, we might want papers from the research, as long as we've got enough shared purpose in what we do. And people talked about doing their research in a very principled way, but also being pragmatic and realistic. And the importance, of course, of grounding the research in lived experience. But the deep answer to this question is we came up with 5, and it was a long and painful process to reach these 5 key features of what it looks like when we have good qualitative research science and good inclusion. And these are that we answer questions we couldn't otherwise answer, but that are important. We get access in ways we couldn't otherwise get. We make critical, and this is important, critical use of insider cultural knowledge. The research is authentic, we've mentioned that already, and it makes an impact, a difference to people's lives. So I think this is a useful piece of research for us as qualitative researchers, because if we're moving into that domain of doing research with people, we mustn't lose sight of doing really good quality research. If we lose our rigour, then we've stopped doing, I think, decent qualitative research, and we've started doing advocacy work, which might be very worthwhile, but it's something different altogether. Okay, so there's some resources there about that one. So then the next project is that I'll talk to you about today is about innovation. And this was something that our Centre for Research Methods became very preoccupied with for a while, because the Research Council that funded us wanted us to promote and support innovation in research methods. And there is this general assumption, isn't there, that innovation is assumed to be a good thing, that research councils, funders, journal editors, reviewers, they all like a little bit of innovation in there. And innovation, of course, is associated with new disciplines emerging, as we've got childhood studies, disability studies, women's studies, etc. These have posed new challenges and have sometimes resulted in new methods. And we've also got new technologies, of course, as we're all experiencing in this pandemic. And the affordances of new technologies, of course, can lead us into innovation. But whether innovation is associated with quality, well, it depends on how we innovate and what it is we do. And there are real caveats in the literature about this, that innovation is good as long as it's not gimmickry. You know, let's not just have gimmicks and tricks to be new. Our innovation should be driven by complex social relations, not just driven by the desire to be innovative. And the innovation in our methods can be incremental, and sometimes they can compromise. Sometimes there can be all sorts of challenges and compromises, but we can kind of incrementally innovate rather than just take bold new steps. Now, as part of this research, we did case studies into 3 innovations and innovators. There was Robert Kozinet's netnography, which is a form of virtual ethnography. Mary Kellett's child-led research, in which she supported children to take on the role of being researchers. And David Gauntlet's serious play with Lego methods as part of the drive towards creative methods. Now, it was very interesting. Our research involved looking at the publications, looking at how other people treated these innovations, and talking with the innovators themselves about what drove them and what was going on. And what we found was that, you know, innovators are motivated by the needs that they see for changes, the shortcomings in other methods. They're often, and this was a surprise to us, driven by ethical concerns that we want to have innovation. But something doesn't become known as an innovative method unless there's a certain amount of publicity, championing of that method fit with the time. I see somebody's got their hand up. Do we want to ask Michael if he can ask his question?
There's a time, Melanie, for
we'll
question
do that
and
later.
answer. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
I shall plough on. Thank you. Do come back to us later, Michael. Yes, and there's this idea that when we make innovations in research, we take risks, and there are dangers as well as virtues in being innovators with our qualitative methods. And it won't surprise you if I come back to reflexivity again and say that this is absolutely essential in how we innovate. We have to be reflexive about what we're doing. We have to have a certain level of caution and self-awareness. And you have here a couple of resources that you can look at around this question of whether innovation and quality go hand in hand. So for the last part of the presentation, I'm turning to the kinds of work that I'm doing in the National Centre for Research Methods at the moment, which is focusing on how we teach quality in qualitative research. I'm an educationalist, a school teacher in my youth, and how we teach qualitative research is really important for whether we end up with a brand of qualitative researchers who are really rigorous and careful and trustworthy. So the teaching of qualitative research is really important. And for the centre, and funded by the Research Council, I've just, in the last couple of years, completed a really big piece of research. It was 4 years and a team of us asking the question of how are advanced social science research methods taught and learnt. And this was qualitative and quantitative, all kinds of research, but I'm going to focus on the qualitative today, of course. And what we tried to do was to develop the pedagogical culture and the pedagogical content knowledge, and I can come back to that if we have time, around teaching qualitative research. We tried to get a typology of the approaches for teaching qualitative and all research methods, and some kind of theoretical framework to hold all of this together. And I said it was a complex study. It was a multi-method study. Within the methods that we used to explore teaching research methods, we wanted methods that were going to be educational in their own right. So there's a paper we wrote about methods that teach, methods that help us to understand as we explore. And we had an expert panel as part of this, where we talked to some of the authors of books like the ones on this slide, Johnny Saldana, Begele Chalisa. I remember our research fellow was a little bit starstruck at interviewing Ivona Lincoln, great names in qualitative research, talking to them and encouraging them to talk to each other about what is it that we have to privilege and prioritize when we teach qualitative research, to make sure that our students go away and do this research really well. We have focus groups of practicing teachers of research methods. We did some video stimulated recall and reflection. So we would film some teaching of research methods and bring the teachers and the learners together to say what was important in there, what's going on. And we also had a diary circle of research methods learners over 2 years, in which they were encouraged to record and reflect on their learning to be a researcher and their learning of different methods. Oh, there's a lot of words on that slide, I apologise. The challenge of teaching qualitative research methods that came out of this related to this idea, and I know it will be familiar to you, that qualitative methods aren't standardised. You can't just give people a recipe book to follow and say, here, you know, complete these steps, you'll be fine. Qualitative research is complex, conceptually challenging. The skills are hard to learn. I remember one of our participants in the diary circle, who was a learner of qualitative methods, said, I don't think you've learned how to be a good qualitative interviewer until one of your participants has broken down in tears with you and you've had to somehow respond and put them back together and hold this interview and this space. And this was talking from experience, you know, I didn't know what I was doing until I'd gone through that. And the complexity of qualitative methods, of course, leads some people to claim that you can't teach this thing in a class or a course. You've got to learn it on the job. You've got to go out there and experience it. And Ivona Lincoln and Amanda Coffey were both fans of this. You can't teach field work as a theoretical course. You've got to get out there in the field. You've got to practice. It's a matter of practice and training, training and practice. You get better as you do it longer, as long as you reflect, I think, as you go along. Our expert views, and I know people are always interested in what these experts had to say, was they focused on these things. These are things we teased out of their interviews that we thought were really important. The importance of working with data. All research methods teaching involves working with data and working critically on qualitative data sets. And Johnny Saldana had a lovely tactic of getting people to read data aloud in his classes. And this is around embodying the data. If you read it on the page, you don't embody it in the same way as you do when you read those words aloud. He had lovely methods involving metaphors, using the colours on a paint colour card, you know, when they're called azure blue, moody blue, these different names. He's saying these are about ascribing names to subtly different things, our qualitative task of naming and conceptualising. Talking about using poetry and film clips in how we teach qualitative research. This is all about trying to kind of conceptualize the processes we go through. And the importance of teaching with authentic data. Nobody really liked made up data to teach qualitative research with. And you can use learners' own data, of course, for their ownership, but sometimes the teacher's data is really good. I often teach, and I've probably done it in this lecture today, with using my own research and my own research data, because I can tell a story about it. I can give the context. I can make it rich and meaningful. And this is very important to both qualitative research and how we communicate it to others. And this last point is about standpoints. You know, we all come to qualitative research with our standpoint, with our values lens, our theoretical lens, our previous experience, and getting our new learners of qualitative methods to appreciate that is critical. So I've just done for this slide for you the headline findings from that study. And these are that teaching qualitative methods involves conceptually difficult material, requires deep knowledge of qualitative research, and involves fostering reflexivity. That teachers of qualitative methods use student-centered learning and active and experiential learning approaches in seeking that deep engagement with the data and with the issues. And they use and value authentic data and their own and learners' standpoints. I hope that's helpful, and I hope you can see the links back to rigor. And because this was a big study, there are a lot of publications that have come out of this, and you can access them through the slide materials. Now, my last slide, you'll be glad to know, takes us to what I'm doing currently at this very minute with the National Centre for Research Methods. So I'm spending 2020 doing a systematic review of the literature from 2014 to 2020 on teaching research methods. And I've just put on this slide for you as a takeaway gift, some real gems that I've found that I think you'll find useful, that really help us to see the complexity of qualitative research and what it means to teach and pass on that qualitative research. And it's really good in lockdown for coronavirus to have a systematic review project, because I can carry on boldly, unaffected largely by the lockdown that we have in the UK. But I'm very happy to come back to you at some time in the future and tell you the results of this systematic review. I'm nowhere near a synthesis yet. I'm at the stage of being very excited by some of the papers we've found. So by way of conclusion then, I think that when we're thinking about rigor and quality and doing qualitative research well, we have to retain our qualitative standpoint. I don't support Ben Daniel's approach of coming over all quantitative to check that we're doing it right. We've got to retain our qualitative standpoint. We mustn't lose sight of our qualitative imagination. We need to remember that quality matters when we're doing qualitative research. And thinking about how we teach qualitative research to others really helps us to reflect on what matters, what's important to qualitative research and doing research of this nature really well. And if we don't do that, then we're bound to fail in our mission. So I hope that has given you food for thought. We're there and you can find these resources and things at the National Centre. And I'm very, very happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lind. We really appreciate if you can see many people are thanking you for your presentation. There's one question though that has repeatedly popped up and we failed to ask you before. They are asking if it's okay for you to share your PowerPoint. Earlier, before this one, you gave us consent to record and post the recording in the AQRA FB page, but we failed to ask you if we can share the PowerPoint. What can you say, Dr. Lind?
Absolutely, yes, that's fine.
Wonderful.
And some of the slides were written with that in mind. I know you can't read those references in a few moments. They're there for you to have something to take away and be a resource.
All right, thank you. Now all of you participants who asked that question, we are assured about the PowerPoint and the recording we can share. So now we give the time to Dr. Pavel and Dr. David to moderate the question and answer.
Oh, you're muted, David.
Right. Dr. Pavel, can you mute yours? Okay, so you answered the first question that most people were asking. I think about a quarter of the questions are about getting the presentation slides from you. So
I take that as encouraging that I was saying something people want to reflect on. I hope it wasn't that I was going too fast.
This is a question from Franco. And the question is, may I ask some tips on how to teach qualitative research to students who are heavily driven to quantitative research?
Oh, yes, it's hard. One of our experts that we spoke with was Charlene Hesse-Bieber, who teaches mixed methods, and she had a good practice that she did in her mixed methods class, which was to try to do lots of pair work and to pair up a qualitatively oriented researcher with a quantitatively oriented researcher and to do some kind of problem-based thinking around an issue so that they could challenge each other's ways of coming at the problem, ask each other questions about why they think in that way. So this is a standpoint approach. Why do you tackle this problem from a qual standpoint or a quant standpoint? So that's one tip. Pair work, I think, can be good. I think another thing I would say is that it takes time and it takes real engagement. And what we need to do is get students reading and really reading good quality qualitative papers and asking questions about those papers and reflecting on them and discussing them, because you don't actually know that you're coming at this with a deeply quantitative standpoint unless you get that standpoint challenged from talking and reading.
So thank you very much. Here's the next question that was voted, I think, 3 times. It was first asked by Michelle. Is it okay if all interviews will be done through Google Meet or Zoom?
Yes, this is what we're all facing at the moment, isn't it? Trying to keep our research projects going in a socially distanced way. We're just being asked in the National Centre for Research Methods at the moment to do a piece of research urgently on how people are adapting their methods and what they're doing to keep qualitative research going during social distancing. And yes, I think people everywhere are turning to platforms like Zoom and Google Meet to carry out interviews. I think I would say here, reflexivity is the thing. We can do that, but we have to think about what changes because I'm on this platform? How is this different? Some people have found that it's actually more democratic and egalitarian doing interviews online, that it creates a kind of more even space somehow. That's something we're going to explore in the research. Do people have more time, less time? Are they focused? We have to tell the story of the context of carrying out that interview when we report that research to make it valid.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Pavel, do you have a question in mind before I ask the other question?
I think we need to follow the questions.
Okay. So here's another question from Shekel Sibala. How do we ensure the transferability of a research when you are limited with the number of participants in a qualitative research?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked often, and it's a very important one. So you're right to ask it. I think it relates to that a previous question about a qualitative mindset. Transferability for a qualitative researcher isn't based on the number of participants or their statistical kind of relationship, their correlates with the wider population. So, for a quantitative researcher, it's all about, have you got the same proportion of men and women and from the same cultural backgrounds and things. For a qualitative researcher, we look at transferability much more through the lens of theory. So if we do our piece of qualitative research, we should be able to generate some theoretical understandings from that. And then that theoretical understanding we can then take and apply to new settings and new populations. So it's not translating the findings, it was true here, therefore it must be true there, but to work out a theory and think about how that theory can be applied. That's the short answer. There's a much longer answer, of course. What's this one?
David, you are muted.
Yes.
Pavel.
I will follow up. There are some questions. The question is coming from Sir Shekel Sibala. What do you think would be the challenges in teaching quality in qualitative research with our present situation regarding the disruption brought by COVID-19?
Yeah, it does bring challenges because we have to find new ways of relating, don't we? So much of qualitative research is about building relationships with our participants and exploring something together. And even with participants in our courses, our students, it's about relationships. And I think we're all struggling to work out how we build those relationships online. My own research centre, we've been having online coffee mornings and just coming together online to just have 15 minutes of chat and how are you coping and can you get food and what are you doing about your 90-year-old mother? And these things are the social glue that I think as quals people we really understand and that we need to kind of bring that to the new situation, finding ways to have that social glue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There is another question, very interesting one. As a teacher researcher, is it possible to make a research on the reading experiences of a child who happens to be my son?
Oh, can you do your research on your own son, was it? You broke up a little bit there. Yes, you can, but reflexivity is really important. What do you bring to this research relationship? How does that influence how you see it, how you understand things? But yes, there are some really interesting papers in top journals, qualitative inquiry, qualitative research, in which people have conducted research with family members. Some really interesting work actually around dementia and working your way through having a relative with dementia.
Thank you. Over to David.
Yeah, so here's a question from Ariel Panes. How do you deal with your own bias in doing qualitative research?
First of all, I would do away with the concept of bias. Bias implies that you can be unbiased. And a lot of us who are just deeply into this qualitative world say there's no such thing as biased and unbiased. What there is our own subjectivities, our own backstory, baggage, values, things that we bring. And I suspect that that's all the things that this questioner is thinking about when they think about bias. And how we deal with them is that we bring them to the fore. We don't try to package them away and slip them under the table and hope they don't appear. We bring them out, we put them on the table, we talk about them, we write about them, we think about them. How does the fact that I'm the mother of this son affect how I do this research? How does my own 20 years as a teacher in schools affect how I think about my research project, about research methods now? You know, we think about it, we reflect, we critically engage with those subjectivities.
Yes, thank you. Here's another question. How do we address ethical considerations when the ethics or the ERB is not available in our university?
So, yeah, ethics review boards happen very differently in different parts of the world, don't they? It's challenging when an ethics review board doesn't understand the context. So in my UK context, sometimes I can take a project to an ethics review board where they understand disability politics and that disabled people aren't just vulnerable, poor things who don't have an opinion, that disabled people can be quite feisty and able to look after themselves in a research context. But sometimes I have to go to a review board where people don't understand that. So I have to take even more time over the context and painting the story, and it can be very, very difficult. And we've had colleagues here in the UK have their research approved here from a review ethics board in the UK, and then go to, say, New Zealand and find that actually the politics of Indigenous peoples is such that ethics approved in the UK is no good in New Zealand because of the sensitivities around Indigenous peoples. So I don't think I'm answering this question very well, Janet. I'm sorry. I just, you know, it's very challenging, and I think, you know, context, we have to deal with context is the best I can do on that one.
Yep, thank you. Oh, we did this already, right? Here's a nice one. Based on your study, what specific ethical factors that motivates and demotivates innovators and researchers?
Yes. I'll work this through. Yeah. Two of the examples come to mind. Mary Kellett, with her child-led research and children as researchers, she was developing that innovation because she thought there was an ethical problem with adults doing research on children, because adults can't lose their adultness. And so they always bring this adult lens. And that if we are to value children as people with their own opinions, their own rights, then we need methods that engages them much more as active participants in research. So it was that motivation to deal with the ethical factor of how should we relate to children? Should we give them decision-making powers? That was really important there. And for Robert Kozinets with the netnography, it was the ethical challenges of, you know, is it okay to lurk in some kind of Facebook group or something, gathering data if you're doing some kind of online ethnography, or do you have to make yourself known? And so his whole kind of methodology or ethnography for doing that was a means of really grappling with all those kind of ethical conundrums. These are good questions.
Yes, they are.
I'll need a cup of tea after this.